So recording in progress, it says. So we're going to get started. My colleagues are at an event today, so I am going to have to admit folks in here as they arrive. So you might see me clicking some buttons here. I'm going to put my contact information here in the chat window in case any of you end up with questions. You may always email me or call me. Yeah, there I am. So if you have any questions, give me a shout out and we'll get you set. As a reminder, for those of you who may have come only to this one as your first one, we have all of them recorded. So just contact me and we'll get you set with any ones that you may have missed previously. So let's get started here. Okay, share screen, there's this. Okay, and from beginning, there we go. Okay, so all right, I hope all of you are able to see that. Sometimes I wonder what I see versus what you see, but I think it's a-okay. So welcome, my name is Kevin. This is Denver Through the Decades, 1890s. I can't believe we've already gotten to the 1890s. This is amazing. Someone says a-okay, excellent. So we've already gotten to the 1890s. This is amazing. I'm super excited because next month will be my favorite decade of all. I'm thrilled that we are going to be approaching the 1900s. That being said, the 1890s, an incredibly important decade for our city's history, and we have a lot to share. My contact information is here. There I am. There I am in Dubuque, Iowa, and my contact information down there. And let's move on to the next. Just a few things. I think I forgot to say this last time. There are lots of things I am not going to be touching that happened in the 1890s. There are way too many things to talk about. It dawned on me just today that I didn't put in here anything about the creation of Loretto Heights. So there are lots of things that I am not talking about today. So if I miss your favorite part of the 1890s, I'm very sorry. I chose some things that came to mind, some things that I think are interesting to me. And so I'm very sorry if I miss your favorite piece. Around Denver and beyond, this is something I try to do each time, so we see how the area is developing. Littleton was actually settled in 1859, so it had been around much longer, but it didn't get around to incorporating until 1890. So by that time, of course, already well established. The city of Sheridan had a much more recent history, very much associated with what was supposed to be Fort Sheridan. We talked about this last month, then became Fort Logan. So 1891, it becomes a city as well. 1891, Cripple Creek gets its gold rush. This is a big deal. Even though Cripple Creek is a significant distance from us, a lot of that money did come into the Denver area because some of the folks associated with the mining industry and all of the pieces that went with it were here in Denver. Now, a lot of that money also flowed into Colorado Springs. If you have ever done one of the tours in Colorado Springs, there are a lot of things that happened to that city because of the Cripple Creek gold. But that's, I suppose, Colorado Springs through the decades, if you ever want to do that presentation. And another one that would end up having a gigantic effect in the 2 decades that are going to be upcoming, the 1900s and the 19-teens, that would be the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. There is a book out there, which you should all read, called Devil in the White City. Half of the book is great. It talks about the creation of that Columbian Exposition. The other half of the book is about a serial killer, and I didn't like that part as much because I'm queasy when it comes to gross things. The part about the exposition, great, totally should read it. This introduced the idea to the, it introduced the world to the idea that cities didn't have to be disgusting. And one of the folks there would end up bringing that idea from Chicago to Denver. And this would have an effect that we are still feeling today. So that's not meant to be a teaser for next month, but I guess it is a teaser for next month. So the Columbian Exposition celebrated the anniversary of Columbus's coming to the New World. Back then, of course, they said Columbus is discovering the New World. That's what they said then. All right, around Denver and beyond. Now, these are created by an associate of mine. He and I know each other. We work together occasionally. Ken Schreppel. Ken Schreppel is a teacher at UC Denver, and he also runs Denver Urbanism and Denver Infill. He's a very, very smart guy, and he made these maps. These are not my maps. He put them together, so I'm just letting you know these are Ken Schreppel's. They are out there for everyone to enjoy. I did 3 decades in a row, 1880s, 90s, and the aughts, so that we could see the development over time, even though today we're focusing on the 1890s. So I don't remember, I think I had one of these in last month. So where you see the red, those are the places that were developed in the 1880s. And I'm going to go back and forth several times here, so don't worry, you're going to get to see it. Watch the red expand. All right, so here we have 1880s, 1890s, and the 1900s. So again, I'm going to go back so that you may watch. In the 1880s, we started to go bananas. You see northeast of Denver's downtown, southeast, northwest, we're going in all those directions. There is no Harvey Park or Bear Valley. There is no southeast or northeast, though up near Montbello and such places. Those would come later. But just notice, oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. Notice just the huge expansion in the first part of the 1890s. And I do say the first part of the 1890s. We're going to go into that a little more fully into the early 1900s. So if you rewatch these, this presentation later, you may linger over these, and these are available on the Denver Urbanism website. So if you'd like to look through these and others, please go to Denver Urbanism and you'll get to see the fruit of Ken Schreppel's labor. All right, let's go on into the 1890s. Now that we've had a little look at that little map showing how people's houses were and businesses were spreading out into the city. The 1890s started out great. Things were wonderful. The Tabor Opera House that you see here, this particular one is from the one in Leadville, but it's just showing you some of the fine things that we had once upon a time. Here on the left-hand side, that is in the Brown Palace Hotel, and the picture in the upper right-hand side, that is from my personal favorite mansion in the city of Denver, and that is the Waring Mansion, which I love. If you ever get a chance to go in there, you should. We talked last month about how the train arrived, well, 2 months ago, we talked about how the train arrived in the 1870s specifically. We got our groove going in 1870s, and in the 1880s, we just went bananas. We were rolling in dough, and we built just in every direction, everything. The 1890s started out pretty much the same idea. So if you look here, this is a picture of Leadville, the picture showing Leadville, and some of the miners up in the upper right-hand corner. Why do I have Leadville in here? Well, Leadville, if you remember, in 1874, silver surpassed gold as the main generator of money in Colorado, and the other strikes around the state really made us rich, but Leadville was one of the places where you got super duper amazingly wealthy. Almost all of the big wigs in Denver had invested in Leadville, and the money that poured out of Leadville thus came to Denver and enabled folks to build mansions, even middle-class homes, warehouses, businesses. So Leadville was building Denver. Now, that's not to say other places weren't as well, but it was really very strongly connected to Leadville. Now, all of that would come to a super crushing halt when President Cleveland signed a piece of legislation in 1893. I wrote it down here. Oh, sorry. That'll let someone in. The repeal of the Sherman-Silver Act, which we're going to talk about here. And one of the quotes at the time, oh, by the way, the late 1880s, early 1890s, we were also having a bit of a drought. So as one of the local folks said, with the crash in the silver market and the drought all around us, public spirit was at an all-time low after the terrible summer of 1893. So exactly what happened? How did all of this come to such a terrible halt? Now, folks, I am not an economist. I really have to stress that. I am not an economist. So I've done a lot of reading on this. I'm going to try to summarize this as best I am able, not being an economist. So the world in the 1870s was moving, the industrial world, excuse me, was moving toward the gold standard. This was seen as being a more modern, more forward-thinking way of running your finances. Previously, we had what was known as bimetallism. You had silver certificates, you had gold certificates. Some of you might have dollar bills that are silver certificates. So your currency in many countries was backed by both. The United States wanted to be like other countries in that they wanted to have very strong currency. So they ended up wanting to move toward being gold-based only. This was seen, however, as something that would cause problems for the silver-based economies of the West. So I wrote down some pieces here. The Gold Coinage Act passed in 1873, and then the Bland-Allison Act of 1878, and then finally the Sherman-Silver Act of 1890. All of these were designed to shore up the silver economies, which were largely in the West. What this did is it forced the federal government to buy silver at artificially inflated prices. Now, I don't have specific numbers, but as an example, you might have some silver that was worth $1. The federal government would buy it for $10. Now, as you may see, that would make a lot of people incredibly wealthy. This was really a contentious issue. If you go to Central City, they tell the story about how President Grant came to Central City and he was going to go out into the Teller Hotel, but the folks there in Central City who were pro-silver, they had lined the boardwalk with silver bricks, and he was going to step onto the silver bricks, which would symbolize his support for silver. He made them move the carriage so he didn't have to step onto the silver. So this was a big economic issue, but other countries, seeing us holding on to silver, were dubious of American financial solidity. So there were threats of disinvestment in the United States, which finally led President Cleveland to repeal the Sherman-Silver Act that happened in June of 1893. We were so supported by silver that it all went, it was a pretty much instant, terrible thing. Now, of course, the federal government was trying to get these hard times taken care of. You notice the pelts back behind Lady Liberty there on the right-hand side, but this one would not be so. One economist that I read said that the crash of 1893 and the subsequent depression was every bit as bad as the crash of 1929. The difference is that in the crash of the 1890s, the federal government did not intervene because at the time, such crashes were seen as being part of the normal economic cycle. So I wrote down some numbers here. After the June 1893 crash, half of the city's banks failed. By September, 377 businesses had failed, 435 mines had closed, more than 50,000 people were out of work. Many miners came from the mountains to Denver looking for work, but we had lots of people in Denver who were already here who were also out of work. So it created a really terrible time to be in Denver. And it was a really terrible time in Colorado, not just Colorado, really a lot of Western states, because many of them were also focused on silver. So this picture is from that time period. I wrote down some quotes to illustrate how big of a change this was. Prior to the crash of 1893, one of our local journalists said, "A beautiful city, Denver is a beautiful city, a parlor city with cabinet finish that is so new that it looks as if it had been made to order and is ready for delivery." In 1890, building permits totaled at more than 2,000. In 1894, building permits 124. One of our neighboring cities, Montclair, they wrote, "Abandoned basement excavations pockmarked the landscape, becoming the homes of wildflowers, cacti, and prairie dogs." The chancellor at the University of Denver said, "The depression was not as swift and sudden as a storm in coming and going, leaving devastation in its wake. This one was sudden enough in coming, but then it showed no haste in departing." So it was really an unhappy time to be in Colorado. Okay, now, as with many economic downturns, some seeds of happiness were put into place. And I'm looking at my phone over here just to make sure I keep on time here. So that's why I'm looking to the left there. Okay, after the crash of 1893, the government in Colorado was saying, okay, this is kind of nuts that we are based really on only one thing. We should not have all of our eggs in one basket. We should diversify some in order to be able to weather the storms of future economic issues. The fellow that you see here on our right, that's J.K. Mullen. He was the one who really suggested and sort of spearheaded this idea of Colorado moving in a greater degree toward agriculture. He was the creator of the Hungarian high altitude flour mills. One of the mills that you see down here, the bottom one, would have been created. That one's in the city of Louisville. And many cities around Colorado began more intensive efforts in irrigation. And the fruits of that bounty you see in the upper left-hand side there. Colorado also moved into manufacturing, tourism, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, as well as taking care of folks with various health concerns, the white plague, tuberculosis being one of the big ones. I wanted to touch on tourism. Oh, also annexations boosted our economy. We'll come to that. Tourism, we weren't really a big tourist state at this point, even though Isabella Bird's book from 1873 had pushed some people in our direction. We were not really set up with a big tourist infrastructure. And also another thing that we had to fight was huge misconceptions around the country about what it would mean if you came to Colorado. I found a beautiful quote from Alexander Graham Bell, who visited Colorado in 1899. He wrote, "I have not, since I have been here, seen a single buffalo, a single cowboy, a single Indian. I have been in Denver 6 hours and I have not been shot at once." So we tried, first of all, to clear up the idea about coming to Colorado. It would not be life-threatening, but we really promoted that idea here in Denver of the proximity to the mountains as being a really big boon for us. So Colorado started embracing that idea there in the 1890s. So agriculture, manufacturing, health, and tourism, some big things that came out that way. It's not as if we gave up mining. We did not. Mining continued. And we still had people coming into Colorado because Colorado was still seen as being a place where there was some economic promise. In fact, during the 1890s, the city and the state's population continued to grow, even though we did have some people leave. Mining did continue, it just took a hit. Okay, there is this wonderful picture that a lot of you, I am sure, have seen, taken from the state capitol in 1894. Hold on, someone has a comment here. "People still have misconceptions. I talked to someone in the 90s who asked where I tied my horse at work." I love it. I'm not surprised. One of the things I find fascinating is how everyone assumes that I ski. I don't ski. So there are people in Colorado who don't ski. I mean, I'm sure skiing is lovely, but I don't. And yes, I haven't ridden a horse in Colorado to get to work either. Okay, this marvelous picture taken in 1894, taken from the Capitol. You're looking toward the northwest. That main street that you see marching off from the middle, that is what would today be the 16th Street Mall. You notice off in the distance, there is no Highlands, really. There's no Westminster, Wheat Ridge, all those things are just kind of gone from this picture. Well, I should say they don't exist yet. The building to the left of 16th Street there that looks like the Capitol, that is the Arapahoe County Courthouse. We, at the time, were the county seat for Arapahoe County. Sadly, that building no longer stands, but it left a legacy. Have any of you been downtown and noticed Court Place? Court Place is named for the courthouse that once stood on its on that block. If you look at the very lower left-hand corner of the picture, that is Denver's first fire station. Very bottom left, the one with the tiny cupola at the top, that's where the Pioneer Monument stands today. If you look over to the right, you're going to see the Brown Palace Hotel there. So notice that the county courthouse is the tallest building in Denver at the time. You do see one or two other buildings that are still with us. You see in the middle, there is the Kittredge building. I don't know if you see where my cursor is, but it's sort of the light tan color building there on what would today be the 16th Street Mall. Way over here to the right of the Brown Palace Hotel, you see the spire of Trinity Methodist. Otherwise, almost all the buildings that you see in this picture are gone. Okay, a really fun picture. Oh, in the foreground, if you look down at the bottom, that field that you see there, that is where Civic Center Station and a skyscraper stand today. Okay. Now, another thing that happened in this time period that really helped Denver was annexations. Around the city of Denver were other cities. These cities had really striven to remain independent and do their own thing. Unfortunately, the crash of 1893 did them in because these cities all tended to be very small. And when a small city, it can be hard to survive. So these are the cities that were annexed into Denver during the 1890s. Now, to be fair, this was not a one-sided affair. Denver also benefited from these cities joining in, and there had been much pressure from Denver for them to join. One of our local newspapers, the Denver Republican, wrote, "We remind the residents of these neighboring cities that you already owe your existence to the larger city at the center, and it is your duty to join the city in order to bring Denver the prestige to which it is entitled." Now, that's not to say these cities necessarily wanted to join Denver, but in the end, they did. In the upper left-hand side there, you have the city of Highlands, which is west of Zuni over towards Sheridan. Just below it, you have the very thin and long city of Colfax, which was not long-lived. Down below in the green there, you have the city of Barnum, which was created by, yes, P.T. Barnum, because you can't do circuses only. That'd be no fun. Way off at the right-hand side, you have the little city of Harmon. The city of Harmon today would be better known as the Cherry Creek Mall and Cherry Creek North area. And then the gigantic city now south of Denver with the uncreative name that is South Denver. South Denver had really tried to remain separate from Denver because South Denver was a dry city. Didn't work. South Denver ended up getting annexed into the city. The city of Denver hugely prospered from all of these annexations, not just in the acquisition of land, but we got a lot of people who contributed to the city, a lot of infrastructure and businesses. So in the end, it was 100% a net gain for Denver. And in 1902, we're just going to repeat this. So this is what's happening after the crash. So the crash did do Denver some favors. This annexation story is part of why Denver's population grew during the 1890s. Okay. The building that you see there, the main building that you see with that beautiful stonework, is Denver's City Hall. Don't bother looking for it today. That beautiful building was torn down in the 1930s. Horrible mistake in my opinion, but there you go. Denver's City Hall was staffed by some pretty corrupt people. In our previous presentations, we have discussed some of the big names who were pulling the underworld strings in Denver's City Hall. Well, we ended up having a new politician come in, Governor Waite. He was a populist, and he really wanted to clean up Denver politics. So what he decided to do was oust the corrupt commissioners from Denver's government. He thought it would be a terrible thing, a terrible example for the state to have its largest city and its capital be the most corrupt. So he tries to get these commissioners kicked out. Well, the commissioners do not want to get kicked out. They're making way too much money. So what they end up doing is barricading themselves inside the building you see here. Where Governor Waite, he's not having any of that. So he says, fine, I'm going to get you out of there. So he calls out the militia, and let's see, I wrote it down here. The militia and the National Guard. And what they're going to do is they are going to bring guns and cannons and all that sort of stuff, and they are going to take these people out of there by force. Well, the folks inside didn't want to be removed, and so they started making these makeshift bombs to protect themselves. And they were up on the upper levels of this building, looking down on the soldiers below. Now, this is 1894. If you notice in the picture, having a battle with guns, slinging bullets, and bombs, and all of this ugly bloodshed, well, that is just way too interesting and exciting to stay home. Of course, these people are going to go down there and watch. Sure, they could get shot or blown up, but that's not going to happen. Nah. So they go down there and they are watching in excitement, breathless, for the City Hall war to take place. In the end, two things do happen. Number one, the courts in Denver do say, no, Governor Waite, what you're doing is not legal. And the federal government of the United States sends in troops to stop this from happening. The courts in Denver said, the governor does have the right to replace commissioners, but he does not have the authority to use the Colorado infantry to do it for him. In the end, the whole thing was pulled off without any bloodshed at all. No one was hurt, nothing happened. But, well, let me say, nothing happened by way of battle, but some things did happen. There were some really sore feelings in Denver about the governor who represented the state coming in and telling Denver what it could and couldn't do. Now, this tune might sound very familiar for you. Most people don't like to be told what they may and may not do. So the people in Denver kind of held on to this grudge, and it kind of grew. You know, they chewed on it for a while. That desire to be separated from authority above them would end up coming to fruition in the next decade. So when we get to the first decade of the next century, we're going to talk about how the City Hall War ended up bearing some fruit. And the question is, where was this City Hall? So, ladies and gentlemen, the foreground where you see the wagons rushing by really, really fast, that is Larimer. Larimer Square would be to the right-hand side of the picture. The street that's running off to the upper right, that is 14th Street. Today, this intersection, 14th and Larimer, where City Hall was, that is a parking lot. And there's a bell sitting there. That bell is all that's left of Denver's City Hall. So 14th and Larimer is where this City Hall building once stood. All right, let me make sure I didn't miss anything about that. Okay, I did not. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, known as the White Plague, was the main killer of people, the main communicable disease in the United States in the 1800s into the early 1900s. It wouldn't get gone until streptomycin and penicillin came in. A lot of people unable to find a cure came west because the drier air and the sunshine acted as palliatives. So a lot of people, while not cured, did get better and were able to lead long-term, sustainable and successful lives in Colorado. And Denver, of course, being the largest city, was the place where a lot of them came. So during the 1890s, we actually had a lot of people come to Denver. These people flooded into the city and provided more income, especially since many of them survived and became healthy enough to work. They wanted to stay, so they built houses, they opened businesses. So tuberculosis, while not necessarily the thing you want to have people coming to your city for, really did us a favor in the long run. Now, that's not to say everyone with tuberculosis received treatment. Many people were worried that Denver would become, and I quote, a city of invalids hobbling about with canes and sputum cups. They did not like that Denver was full of consumptives. But as one historian, Louisa Ward Arps, wrote, if you have never read her book, Denver in Slices, great book, Louisa Ward Arps wrote that in the 1890s, when more than 30,000 consumptives arrived in Denver, she wrote, consumptives were to Denver's economy then what tourists are to Denver's economy today. Miss Arps was writing in the 1950s. So at that time, again, she was saying that consumption was bringing in as many people as tourism. Okay, now a lot of people were getting denied help. Jewish people were frequently told that they may not come into hospitals simply because they were Jewish. There were new healthcare facilities all around, but they were often racist or bigoted against various religions. So the lady in the upper part of the picture here, Frances Weisbart Jacobs, who is known as the Mother of Charities and has her face in stained glass in our Colorado State Capitol. She ended up working to build a hospital that would serve all people, regardless of their background. The motto for the hospital that she would help to found, National Jewish, the motto was, none may enter who can pay, none can pay who enter. Basically, the idea was anyone who needed treatment could come in and be treated at National Jewish. In fact, the first patient at National Jewish was a Protestant Swedish woman from Minnesota. Now, in the late 1880s, Mrs. Jacobs, that you see here, she helped to raise money. She was going around gathering all the money, and in the end, the hospital started to be built. She unfortunately passed away before it was completed. There in 1893, the crash of 1893 meant that the hospital could not immediately take in patients, but shortly thereafter, they were able to get their finances together, and National Jewish is still with us today. What is the part of the body that National Jewish is famous for treating? Pulmonary, that's right, lungs, which is where tuberculosis resides. The picture on the right-hand side, that's the Molkery in the Montclair neighborhood. The middle level that you see there was for tuberculosis patients at one point. The lower level was for cows. This building, Molkery, means milk house in German. It was believed at the time that smelling the natural odors and vapors of the cows would help you get better. That is why between the bottom floor and the middle floor, there wasn't a floor, there was a grate. So as all those cows produced their vapors, the vapors would rise up into your bedroom. I feel better already. All right, tuberculosis. Don't think tuberculosis is gone, by the way. Tuberculosis is still with us. I was teaching English to immigrants here in Denver when I was infected with tuberculosis by one of my students. Woohoo! Okay, Denver's first cemetery on our left-hand side. Those two pictures that you see from on the left were from Denver's first cemetery. Denver's first cemetery was meant to be a beautiful park-like cemetery. The problem was they did not water. And when you don't water trees and flowers and grass, here in the semi-arid West, often those trees and flowers and grass do not prosper. So by the 1890s, Mount Prospect, Mount Calvary, and the Jewish cemetery, Calvary, yes, and the Jewish cemetery were all kind of weed-infested dead tree laughingstocks. Also, the rich people of Denver had made their way over there. They wanted a park and not a cemetery. Most of you know this story. Fairmount Cemetery, which is what you see on the right-hand side, those two pictures there, opened in 1893. That was the new posh cemetery. Hold on, I'm doubting myself here. Oh yeah, Fairmount Cemetery opened. That was the new posh cemetery. They made sure that they had water so that they could plant and it would become a beautiful place. In so doing, what they did is they abandoned those other cemeteries. Mount Prospect, which was the Protestant cemetery, would become today's Denver's Cheeseman Park. The upper left-hand side, that would end up becoming the Catholic cemetery, or the Catholic cemetery ended up becoming Denver's Botanic Gardens, and the Jewish cemetery became Congress Park and the parking garage. When I was a volunteer at the Denver Botanic Gardens, in their volunteer manual, it said, if while digging in the garden, you come upon a bone, don't panic, just let us know. We will contact the city coroner's office and they will come get the bones. In the meantime, don't worry because fertilizer comes in many forms. That's actually from the volunteer manual at the Denver Botanic Gardens, formerly a cemetery. Okay, we talked last time about the opening of Union Station, or Union Depot as it was originally known. This is the original Union Depot, which opened there in 1880-81. Unfortunately, in 1894, the steeple that you see there had a terrible fire and was destroyed. So they rebuilt it. Here are some pictures of that rebuilt station. As you see, they also removed many of the wonderful Second Empire embellishments. So notice many of those decorative pieces, especially at the roof line, are removed in the second iteration. So 1894, Union Station Central Section burns. And then we get our second steeple at Denver's Union Station. Now, so far through our Denver Through the Decades, we've touched on the Tabors each session, and we are going to touch on them again in future ones. This was the last one for their main part of their story. In 1893, the Tabors lost their fortune. They had their eggs all in one basket, the silver basket. When the Tabors' fortune went kaput, they were penniless. This happened 1893, and they struggled to get back into the money. Toward the end of the decade, the bigwigs in Denver, feeling sorry for Horace, did give him a job at the post office that you see there on the picture, or in the picture on the left. So they made him the postmaster, which was a pretty good job for someone who had been out of work, but compared with the fortune he had once had, of course, it was a pittance. In the end, he died in 1899. His wife, Elizabeth, better known by the sobriquet Baby Doe, She was a devout Catholic. She attended this church that you see on the right-hand side, that is Sacred Heart Catholic Church. On his deathbed, she did prevail upon her non-religious husband to be baptized. The church on the right sent Father Barry, who baptized Horace Tabor on his deathbed, and he died in 1899. The post office is not still standing. The post office that you see there in the picture was torn down in the 50s, I think it was. The same time, maybe early 60s, but it was torn down the same time the Tabor Grand Opera House was. So Father Barry and this church here that you see on the right was part of the Tabor story, and that he was baptized by the fellow from that church. So the Tabors in 1899, Horace is gone, and Elizabeth, his second wife, is left to her own devices. In our next presentation, we'll talk about what came of that. 1892, I think what most people would consider to be the most famous hotel in Denver opened. I don't know how many of you get to see it from this angle very often. That is the Brown Palace Hotel on the left. The Brown Palace Hotel was not placed on this lot because of its unusual shape. Henry Brown owned this lot. He chose it because it had a dependable well, and he did not want his hotel to be beholden to others for water. Today, every drop of water in this hotel, if you drink tea, if you wash your hands, if you take a shower, if you flush the toilet, it's all from that well beneath the hotel. So they are not part of the Denver water grid. If you notice the picture on the left, you're going to see the skylight, that very prominent square there in the middle. The architect did not want to have, I'm sorry, not the architect, the builder or the owner, Henry Brown, did not want to have any rooms that did not have sunlight. The only way to do that was to have no interior rooms. So the skylight was a way to bring light into the atrium, which at the time was an audacious waste of space. No one did that back in the day. Today, of course, it's quite commonplace. The Brown Palace Hotel opened again 1892. On our right-hand side, you have a picture from the lobby during the holidays. Believe it or not, that chandelier and all of the other decorations were created specifically for the lobby of the Brown Palace Hotel by, oh, the name just went out of my mind all of a sudden. Oh, the Denver Debutante Ball. The Denver Debutante Ball has happened at the Brown Palace Hotel, I think, for 60-something years. And they own the decorations that you see there, not the Brown Palace Hotel. Because the ball is at the Brown, they created the decorations so that the Brown would look its best for their festivities. All right, that's the Brown Palace Hotel. Deborah Faulkner there, she's amazing. Go take a tour with her. You will not regret it. She is 122% awesome. Also, 1890, Elitch's opens, May 1st, 1890. John and Mary Elitch, you see them there at the upper left-hand side, opened their zoological and botanical garden. Mary was a great fan of animals. You see her there with some of her collection, some of her menagerie, as she called it there, the upper right-hand side. You see in the lower right-hand side that the streetcars did provide service for Elitch's, and the building that you see on the lower left-hand side there, that one was opened in 1891. That is the theater. Now, I want to say this before I forget, because I will totally forget. Ladies and gentlemen, the Elitch Theater, which has not been open to the public in decades, is having its grand reopening open house on June 11th. It's a Saturday. I think it's from 9 to 1, I think it is. You should look it up to make sure. They have finally, over the years, they were raising money, and they have finally gotten the money to put in the last thing that they needed, which would be restrooms. I, unfortunately, am going to be out of town, so I am not going to go. So I would like all of you to go, because most of you, I'm going to guarantee, have not been in this theater since maybe the 1990s when it closed. And it's just been sitting there. So mark it on your calendars, June 11th, I think from 9 to 1. It's a free open house. Go and enjoy a bit of our history. Cecil B. DeMille himself said that the Elitch Theater was, quote, one of the cradles of American theater. Now, even though John Elitch, that you see up there in the upper left-hand side, died before the park's second season, his wife carried on the dream, and Elitch's would remain in this place until the mid-1990s, when it moved to its current location. So folks, super excited to share with you that great news about the Elitch Theater. Now, the story of Elitch's is gigantic, but I have too many things to touch on, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. If you have more questions, let me know. There's also a great book on the history of the entire park. Let me know if you need that or have any questions. I just have too much to say. It was a great decade. Okay, this is a story that comes to fruition in the 1890s as well. Margaret Tobin, the lady that you see on the right, got to Colorado in 1886. She ended up meeting J.J. Brown, and they got married. He, at the time, was not rich. He was not a rich man. Okay, let me write it. I wrote it down here. Too many dates. The house that you see on the left-hand side there was built in 1890. It was not built for the Browns. After he, because he was working in the mining industry, became fantastically wealthy in 1893, they ended up moving to this house. So Margaret Brown and her husband JJ moved into this house in the 1890s, and they remained there for many years. Later on, after they separated, I wrote down the year. They separated in 1909. She died in 1932. This house that you see on the left would end up becoming apartments, and then later on made into the House Museum. But for our story, some seminal moments. They got rich, they moved to Denver in the 1890s, and here Margaret sought to become part of Denver society. She was considered to be untouchable. She had 3 strikes against her. She was Irish, she was Catholic, and she was a gold digger. She was not really a gold digger. She married JJ before he got rich. But in the eyes of Denver society, 3 strikes and you're out. So that happened in the 1890s. This one's awfully fun. A lot of people don't realize this. What would we call the Festival of Mountain and Plain today? I bet you've heard of it, even though not by this name. The Festival of Mountain and Plain opened in 1895. It was launched as a way to promote the city and Colorado and all of its produce, the mining and the agriculture. This today would be known as the Taste of Colorado. The Festival of Mountain and Plain happened with great fanfare. They let all the kids out of school. It happened for several years in the 1890s. It went out for a few years. It came back in the first part of the 1900s, and then it vanished until the 1980s when it was resurrected by the Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods as Taste of Colorado. So what we enjoy now started in the 1890s with this wonderful name, the Festival of Mountain and Plain. Personally, I like that name better. So if ever I become governor, I will put it back. Vote for Kevin. Those are the important things that I will run on if I get to be governor. Another thing that happened during this time period, Denver's darling was made official, Washington Park. They had begun the creation of the park in the 1880s, but it really didn't do anything. The Smith's Ditch was already there. The city of South Denver had tried some things, but nothing really had taken place. Really, in the 1890s, after Denver gets the park, then we start building. This brings people jobs, it lifts spirits, and in 1899, it is officially opened as Washington Park, honoring the 100th birthday of the death of President Washington. I found this really great quote about the park. This is while they were starting the process of building it. Prior to the park, you saw nothing but barren desolation, nothing the likes of which had ever been imagined before. Another person says, we need the city to do something with this lake because it attracts gay young men who insist on showing their anatomy as they bathe in the waters. In other words, the young men were skinny dipping in the lake, and this caused problems. Remember, in the olden days, gay young men meant something very different from what it does today. So 1899, Washington Park, Denver's darling, officially opened. Now, for those of you who like having a delicious meal while you're stared at by a lot of dead animals, in 1893, the Buckhorn Exchange opened. Shorty Scout Zeitz opened this restaurant. He was a very famous guy. He had traveled with Buffalo Bill. He ended up working with Teddy Roosevelt on multiple hunts. He opened this restaurant in 1893 and has been going strong ever since. So this place, lots of famous people have come through there. President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt came through. A lot of the Native Americans who really admired Shorty Scout Zeitz came through. This place is a place for history and paraphernalia. They survived Prohibition by serving just food, malted drinks, sarsaparilla, and the like. There are accusations that they also ran liquor on the side, but we don't actually have any proof of that. When Prohibition ended, the folks here at the Buckhorn were the first ones to get a liquor license. So they are very proud of having liquor license #1 in the Buckhorn Exchange. So it's been here again since 1893. Now, I did tell you earlier that I chose buildings that make me happy or things that make me happy. So since I'm the one who put this together, I'm going to tell you about my favorite building in downtown Denver, the beautiful, breathtaking, resplendent, and wonderful Equitable building. If you have not yet gone into the lobby of this building, it is open to the public. During the week, during business hours, you may go into the lobby. It is so beautiful. This was started by the Equitable Insurance Company, the Equitable Insurance Company in 1892. It was absolutely an expensive, over-the-top building because they were showing off the power of their company. One of our local architectural folks said, if God be in the details, then the Equitable is celestial. I wrote down some details here. French and Italian marble in the pillars, walls, and floor, handmade elegant chandeliers, mosaic ceiling, bronze grand staircase, and one of a kind, nowhere else on the earth, Tiffany stained glass. Now, the reason to go in here is because the lobby is beautiful. Here's the lobby. The stained glass, you see some of it there. The central figure there in the window on the right is Minerva, the goddess of charity and protection. In other words, an insurance company that's going to take care of you. Another thing that started happening in the 1890s, we started building more viaducts. Our first viaduct went in the 1880s, but in the 1890s, we went crazy. On the left-hand side there, you see the construction of the 14th Street Viaduct. The viaducts were all over Denver. Some of you may remember them. They were almost all of them gone by the 1990s. Some of those viaducts have left signs behind. The picture on the upper right-hand side there, that is where the tattered cover used to be in the Maury Mercantile. Notice the door on the upper level there. That's because the viaduct that used to be there allowed people to go in at that level, but the viaduct is now gone. This is that viaduct, ladies and gentlemen. Over here on the right-hand side, you have the Barteldus Hartig building. That stands across from the tattered cover, as was. This streetcar is coming down off that viaduct. And over here to the left, you can see the little walkway bridge that goes over to the building that once held the tattered cover. Also in the 1890s, what had been more than a dozen different streetcar companies by 1899 had been whittled down to only one. In 1899, we got the Denver Tramway Corporation Company, and the last of our cable cars was dismantled. In the 1890s, we also got the Denver Mint built. It's a bit of a long story. Even though the building was built in the 1890s, officially opened in 1897, I think it was. Let me look here. Yes, 1897, with financial issues and changes in legal stature and all that stuff, they actually wouldn't end up coining anything, producing any coins until 1905. I'm sorry, 1906. 1906. But the building was finished in 1897. Okay, now I have tried to be better. I keep running over in time here. This is a picture of Larimer looking northeast toward what would be the Cheesecake Factory now. All of the buildings that you see in this picture were torn to the ground because they were hideous, old, nasty things, and we did not want them. If you were standing in this window, you'd be in the Granite Building, and to your left-hand side would be today's Larimer Square. So, folks, do you have any questions? And I really apologize if I have not hit the part of 1890s that you really, really like. As I say, you're always welcome to shoot me an email. I did want to mention some upcoming tours that we have. I am still trying to move forward, so any help you can give and spreading the word would be beautiful. In June, we are doing a birding tour with Norm. He's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to go to the wineries of the Western Slope in August. I will be on that tour, which is hysterical since I'm a teetotaler, but I will be there to take care of you. So what I suggest is you drink to excess, because that would be a great thing, and then I will take care of you. And then the Rocky Mountaineer. This is the same company that does the Rocky Mountaineer in Canada. It's their first year doing the one here in the United States. Equitable Building at Stout and 17th. So yes, Stout and 17th still there. Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, please go. It's open every weekday. So go do it. Cherry Creek Bike Tour, May 7th. Yes, still good to go. Thank you for the kind words. Folks, do spread the word that we're trying to get some of these tours going. I hope to see you again. At this point, I'm just going to watch to see if we have any more questions. If you don't have any questions, thank you for joining with the 1890s. Remember, come next month, it's going to be my favorite decade, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for the kind words. Remember, folks, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to email me or call me, and we'll get you all set. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'm going to call it a night. Ladies and gentlemen, happy last Thursday in April. I'll see you next month.